It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and as always, I have with me my co-host, Andy Grabner. How you doing, Andy? Sassy Andy today.
Sassy? Why sassy?
You're pretty sassy today.
Okay.
Well, are you familiar with that term at all, or no?
I am, yeah. But
okay.
I'm just still,
you came onto the call with jokes and funny stuff, and you know, our listeners are going to expect the absolute best episode ever from us today because
they will get it.
They will. Why will they get it?
Well, the thing is, first of all, I want to remind everybody what you will get at the end of the hour. Hopefully, tickets to Paul McCartney. Hopefully, yeah. And I think you earn it because I just came back from a weekend and I saw two concerts. I saw Robbie Williams and I saw Zucchero.
I don't know the second one. I know that Robbie Williams, they made a biopic about him, and it was an ape.
Yeah, it was an amazing movie.
That's what I've heard. I've heard it's really good, but I don't know much about him. But yeah.
In the end, in his movie, there were no secrets and nothing that he was shying away from any privacy. He shared a lot of stuff from his personal life, which I think is a perfect segue now to the topic. It is about time to introduce our guest today. And I'm very happy that we have one of our colleagues on the call today, Cat Easdon. Thank you so much for being here. I think we met probably multiple times, but I remember when you were giving an internal talk in one of our engineering labs around privacy engineering, and then I approached you afterwards and said, hey, you have a lot of stuff, a lot of knowledge on a topic that I am not at all familiar with, but that I think everybody should have a basic understanding. And so that's why we invited Cat to Pure Performance. And now I think I want to pass it over to you. I want to quickly get an introduction, who you are, what you do, where you are, because we see from the Zoom background, you have a beautiful landscape from Innsbruck. I think that's what you said, but maybe just fill us in.
Sure. I'm very glad we had that conversation, Andy. I'd like to connect us. Thanks for having me on the podcast. So yeah, I'm Kat. I currently lead Dynatrace's privacy engineering team. My background before that was in hardware security research, and I still do a little bit of research on the side. And I'm based in Innsbruck, but as you can probably tell from my accent and the fact I say privacy rather than privacy, which is a running gag, confuses quite a lot of people. I'm originally from the UK.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And what brought you to Innsbruck?
A mix of things. I absolutely love spending time in the mountains, and also personal reasons. My partner's based in Munich, so when I came to Austria originally, I was in Graz. I think that is actually where we first met, Andy, years ago when you did a visit to our Graz lab. But then the privacy engineering team didn't exist. I was working in licensing, and then over time, reassessed where I wanted to be based, and Innsbruck was a natural fit. It's full of crazy people like me who are just completely obsessed with the mountains. The best kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's a good advertisement too. For the region of Tyrol. So, folks, if you're
crazy about mountains,
if you're crazy about mountains, I mean, I know obviously Denver, Colorado would be a good place to, Brian, but Innsbruck, Tyrol is also a great spot.
Well, there are no mountains in Denver.
Yeah, but close by. Right? I mean,
I was just busting your chops.
I think you've got better power than us, Brian, for skiing. So
yeah,
Denver does well on that one.
We do a lot of fake snow, though, using up all of our water.
Yeah, that's. I think fake snow, artificial snow is something we unfortunately more and more rely on as well, because of changing weather. But let's go back to the topic. You gave me a great list of topics we could talk about, and we'll see how much we can actually fit into this episode, and we may ask you back. But two things stood out, and I want to start with privacy engineering. What is it? What is privacy engineering? What can we as people that are not in that field understand about privacy engineering? What do we need to know?
Excellent question. How much time we have? Could we go on till 2-3 hours? This is a fun question because it's still a struggle to answer, even for those of us based in the field. Mm-hmm. I'd say the answer is it's a very broad term, but one of my favorite ways to describe it is it's the art of trying to translate laws and policies to protect privacy into code. And you can do that at lots of different levels. So some privacy engineers don't write any code, but they work on the intermediate stages. So perhaps translating legal requirements into policy requirements that we can apply across the whole organization, figuring out processes to implement that across the software development lifecycle. Or you can be, as I am and as Dynatrace's privacy engineering team is, really focused at the code level and building privacy features, but also looking at how we can integrate privacy checks into the software development lifecycle, checks on pull requests, for example.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure, if you can answer this question, but I'll give it a try nevertheless. You said when we met, you were in Graz, you were in a different team. There was no privacy team yet. See, privacy. I'll try to adjust my... Yeah, I also learned British English, but I think I spent too much time in the States. So my question is, back when you were in Graz, you said there was no privacy team. Why the move from Dynatrace to invest in such a team, to build such a team? Is this something that other organizations also do at a certain size? Have things changed over the years? What are some good indicators when an organization, a software organization, or any type of organization needs a dedicated team?
Another great question. And I would say the key indicator is when the people tasked with privacy are really struggling to implement what they need to implement across the organization. And that will vary depending on the organization, what their product or service is. It could happen at very different sizes. So if this is a really sensitive use case, that could happen just when you're a startup of 10 people, you might already want a privacy engineer. We saw that, for example, with the AI companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, invested in privacy quite early on because, as we know, people will send absolutely anything to an AI model, really sending sensitive details of their lives. And so privacy is essential. Whereas if you have a product where it's very unlikely somebody is going to send you any sensitive data, then it might be that only once you get to a very large scale, you start thinking about having a technical component to privacy, because you might be able to handle all the requirements you need to meet and protect your users and maintain your customers' trust in how you're protecting their data with less technical measures, organizational measures, essentially policies that are applied across the organization. So it really depends on what your development lifecycle looks like, what the organizational context is. Mm-hmm. I wish I could give you a fixed size of once an organization crosses 200 people, that's when you hire a privacy engineer. Would also help create some jobs for us because it's a really niche field. So anyone listening, please establish a privacy engineering team at any size.
And it is an interest. The reason why I ask it, I've been spending a lot of my last couple of months and maybe a year or two on platform engineering, right? And the question always comes up: what is a good time to invest in a platform engineering team? What is a good time to think about building an internal product for self-service? And there are, as you said, there's no fixed number. But it's actually similar to what you said earlier, when there's too much effort, or when there's too many people within an organization struggling with the same things or implementing their own self-service portals, their own tools to make the day-to-day life easier. This is then a good point when you say, well, maybe we're investing in a central platform engineering team. And that's why I was asking the question if there's any best practices, any surveys, any reports out there that people can look into and get some ideas.
I really like that comparison, because something I want to emphasize is it's not just privacy engineers who do privacy and actually build technical solutions for privacy. So it could be that you have engineers across your organization who are working on how to detect personal data, for example, to mask it. And if you find you have 3 separate teams who are reinventing the wheel each time, then that could be the time when you want a central privacy engineering team who could maintain that, offer it as a shared library that's offered to everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's also another, thank you for that. I will take this into my repertoire when I talk about platform engineering, right? Because in the end, it's once we start duplicating efforts, this basically means you are becoming very inefficient as an organization because you don't hire these people to reinvent the wheel. Often, though, it's not visible, right? Often we lack the visibility that other teams are solving the same problem. And I think it also needs an organization's maturity to say, hey, we need to look into everything we do. We need to understand where do we have duplicated efforts to solve essentially the same problem, and how can we make this easier and provide it as you said, a shared library. In platform engineering, we talk a lot about an IDP, an internal development portal where people can go to and then consume things as a self-service. Yeah, that's cool. Got another question for you. What is privacy data? Privacy data, is there a global definition of what is data that needs to be protected? Or are there many different regulations around the globe that we, especially, we are working for a global operating organization. Do we have to then adhere to different regional laws or different regional definitions of privacy?
Yes, so Dynatrace definitely does, and so do other organizations operating across multiple countries. And this is where it gets really challenging because there are very different definitions. So it's something like an email address. Most laws agree that that is personal data. So we have some data types where you can reliably say pretty much wherever we are in the world, this is personal data and we need to protect it. But then you have sector-specific requirements in healthcare, for example. There's the HIPAA privacy rule in the US to look into. And then specific identifiers that may not seem sensitive to us, but in a different context are sensitive. So, for example, in some regions of the world, your tribal affiliation is considered highly sensitive data about you. That's not something that springs to mind for me in my cultural context. That's where it's really tricky because it's not just about your legal knowledge, but also some element of cultural understanding and trying to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who has a very different life to your own. So something I find easier to focus on rather than the specific legal requirements, and this is something I use when I'm trying to train up engineers, rather than teaching them this is what's required in the EU, this is what's required in India. That's too much detail. It becomes overwhelming to somebody who isn't a specialist in this area. So I instead focus on meeting people's expectations. So I ask them to think about the context of this data transfer and say, would this meet your expectations in this scenario? Would you be surprised that this data is being collected about you and it's being used for this purpose? An example may be if you're at the doctor's, you're very happy to share sensitive health information because you want the doctor to diagnose you and help you get better. But if you're asked the very same questions in a job interview, that would be a massive red flag, and you're not going to work for that company because something strange is happening at that company. So context really matters. The setting that you're in really matters. So I find that a more helpful framing than which data types do we need to care about. Of course, we do need to think about data types at times, but when you're thinking about a specific scenario, will this violate some privacy law or not? Instead of each engineer trying to think through legal requirements, just think about, would this meet my expectations? Would I be surprised? The challenge there, coming back to something I mentioned before regarding the putting yourself in the shoes of somebody who's very different to your own, that's where this comparison can fall down if you don't have a very diverse team and somebody thinks, well, I would be very happy to share this, there's no danger to me, but actually to somebody in a minority group, it might be really dangerous to share that information. So that's the limitation with this, but at least it saves people having to learn a lot of legal detail.
I think this is also a call out that diversity is a very good thing because you have a lot of different perspectives and opinions and backgrounds that together can then really form a strong sense and a strong foundation for good privacy engineering, and not just privacy engineering in general. Obviously, having many different people with different backgrounds and different thoughts plays out and pays out pretty well.
I was going to say too, is it an interesting idea with the question of, what I find this an awkward conversation, or right, and having the diverse, broad background thoughts on it, because I think this comes up in, not to change the subject in any way, shape, or form, but when you think about like social media or all these different apps that are collecting our data in order for free usage, and so many people are like, yeah, well, I don't care, right? But there are a lot of people who do care. Right, but that obviously gets put to the wayside for for the free product. But when it comes to a corporation and having this, data sharing, it's a lot different than just what's in the public view. But the idea of some people would be okay with it, right? The reason you said you need a diverse background of people is to have that setup, and it's something you see all around. Like, what do I have to hide? But there is a principle behind it, which is a lot harder to pin down with just one or two people. I don't know if that made sense.
And it brings me to the next question, and kind of like, I guess we are in 2025, and I guess we ended up here with a lot of regulation because of, maybe historical events where some people were very relaxed on these things and were just doing things and collecting data and not protecting it in the right way that they shouldn't have. Is there any, can you give us a little bit of a history overview of how we ended actually up here where we are, and things that we should know about why privacy engineering is what it is today?
So I'll assume your listeners are relatively familiar with what's happening currently and how data has been monetized over the last few decades. And that's brought us some amazing advances. So the cool things we can do with LLMs now would never have been possible without those LLMs ingesting enormous amounts of data. Similarly, facial recognition and computer vision algorithms were trained on huge quantities of images that were collected, usually without consent, because there was no legal requirement to get consent at the time. So this has enabled lots of cool things that we now enjoy, sometimes depend on in the systems that we're building or using. But this wild west we had on the internet also led to lots of exploitation of personal data. And I think the most shocking examples are where we saw elections being interfered with, micro-profiling of people based on what seemed like non-sensitive data about them. Facebook likes, I like dogs, I listen to Britney Spears, all these innocuous sounding things that how could you possibly influence a person's voting decisions with this information? Actually, if you have enough of those data points, you can profile them into quite a fine category and guess which interests are, which voting concerns are of the most interest for them, then target them with advertising, which is far more effective than broad spectrum political advertising as we used to have. So this came up, for example, with Facebook for this case where, and it wasn't solely about election interference, it was more the fact that they gave third parties extensive access to Facebook users' data, which they could use for a variety of purposes, including this micro-profiling and targeting. They were hit with, I believe it's still the largest fine ever, I may be wrong there. It was $5 billion from the Federal Trade Commission in the US. So that I'd say was one of the turning points. Regulators started to notice we really need to fight back against this. This is having very severe societal impacts. It's not just the individual level impact, which is of course important, but societal level impacts. But how do you fight back against it when you have these companies that have based their business model on this exploitation of data? You could try to regulate them out of existence, but they have their annual revenue makes them the size of large countries in some cases. So you end up with these tech companies that are really like political actors on the world stage. And still, nobody knows what to do with them. Nobody knows how to negotiate with these new political actors who have the same power as states. Canada tries to regulate Facebook, and Facebook just says no, as if they were negotiating country to country. I don't want to demonize just Facebook here. This is an issue across lots of different companies. But they came to mind because of that particularly high fine from the FTC. So in that context, and coming back to the EU context that I'm most familiar with, we have the GDPR emerging. And I think it's really important to view this as not just privacy law, but a broader topic of digital regulation, trying to work out how to negotiate with these companies as international actors. It's a grand political project. It's very opinionated. And that's important to understand because we see a lot of pushback against it, even internally within the European Union now. There's pushback against this wave of digital regulation, not just the GDPR, but also other accompanying laws. And you end up with privacy engineers and privacy professionals in their organizations as the people who are supposed to act out this political ideology. It's a political statement, and you're an employee of a company and you want the company to succeed, but you're also supposed to be acting out this ideology. And that's something that comes up again and again in my discussions with privacy professionals, so lawyers, privacy engineers, across the spectrum of privacy roles. When I talk to others in the industry, they face such resistance within their organizations, and some of it is specific to that organization, but a large part of it is, we need to change this organization's business model to implement this. How are we going to do that? So it feels a bit sort of David and Goliath sometimes in some organizations. In others, the business model is already accommodating to this, and it's a simple, I say simple with air quotes, because it's not that simple, but as simple as trying to find the technical ways to implement these additional protection measures that are mandated. And in other organizations, you find yourself up against the CEO, basically, telling them they need to change their business model.
And maybe to bring an analogy, I guess, and correct me if I got this then right, if you think about energy, right? If you think about all the big oil companies that obviously still want to exploit all the oil that still comes out of our wells. But if we as a society think that we want to move to other ways of energy, right? Wind, solar, and these oil companies have not, they would basically need to change, or they have a vested interest that they can still dig out oil as long as possible, right? Because they've made an investment, and they, rightfully so, probably want to get their investment out of, they want to get money back out of their investment. But on the other side, if we are then dictating that we need to go into a different direction, then I can see the struggle, right? You want to be obviously playing green, but if green is currently not what your company strategy was, then you need to change your company strategy, your business model, or whatever it is. So it feels, at least from, this is kind of the analogy that I came up with. It's a struggle for some, but it's the right thing to do. And I guess the question is then, who is on the longer lever, right? And who can move faster? Yeah. Really interesting. One of the things because you were earlier advocating for, if you please become privacy engineers, and please, if you're an organization and you don't have a privacy engineering team yet, start one. If people are looking for that type of job, of role, what are some of the necessary skills? Any tips? Because obviously you also changed from what you did earlier then to the privacy. Any tips that you have? What makes a good privacy engineer?
Great question. Yeah. So a bit more about my background. I had a little exposure to privacy before I did hardware security research. I interned at Palantir on their privacy and civil liberties team, and found that absolutely fascinating, learned so much from them, and was very tempted to stay. But then the allure of research tempted me over to Graz. I had already committed to starting a PhD there. And although it seems like a huge topic switch, I think the common theme is being interested in how data is leaked, how systems are exploited. And so I think this offensive mindset is something that's very easily transferable from security to privacy. And it's something we've been trying to do at Dynatrace. We work really closely together with our product security teams, and we've been trying to cross-train them in privacy. It's a slightly different perspective, but actually you're most of the way there if you're already familiar with threat modeling systems and thinking about how could we break this, how could somebody attack this. It just tends to be different kinds of data and different threat actor scenarios that you're thinking about. But that core practice of threat modeling is something that you already know. So huge shout out to everyone working in security. Feel free to stay working in security because we need you. But if you want to cross over to privacy, you're also very welcome, and it won't be too hard a transition. So threat modeling, of course, some degree of privacy domain knowledge. And it never feels like you know enough because the legal situations around the world are changing all the time. Right now with GDPR, we could end up with that being slimmed down, and we'll have a GDPR light. They're looking at ways to deregulate. So that could drastically change in the EU. We don't know. Nobody's quite sure yet. The IAPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, is a great way to try and keep up with some of these changes. You can become a member, and they have lots of online resources, conferences, virtual and in-person meetups, which are a great way to get to know other privacy professionals and share tips. Because there is a lot of ambiguity in how you can interpret the regulations. So it really helps to ask people from 10 other different companies, hey, how are you interpreting this? How have you implemented this? Do you feel comfortable with it? What's your confidence level in that this is the correct interpretation and the courts will agree? So that's really, really helpful. The other aspect I'd say is communication skills. And this is something that continues to surprise me over and over again, just how crucial that is. So I described privacy engineering at the start as kind of trying to translate law and policy into code. And this active translation, that there's so much misunderstanding happening. I've encountered engineers who thought email addresses can't be personal data, right? Because we have to process them and we wouldn't be processing personal data. So you have to address these kind of misunderstandings. Also misunderstandings between different layers of the organization. So if as an engineer deeply focused on the technical details, you go to the legal team complaining about these technical details, there will be a total misunderstanding. Even terms like service can cause confusion. So they might be thinking at a higher level of some kind of service that Dynatrace offers to its customers. When I say service, I mean a microservice. I'm literally thinking of a Java microservice, and I'll start talking to you about which Kubernetes cluster it's running on. And that translation gap is something that time and time again we need to address.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. I mean, and it's examples that I guess the whole terminology definition. I think this is. I remember one thing. I've maybe mentioned this in the previous podcast, but DORA is a big topic for me. But DORA for me means maybe something completely different than for you, Cat, because for me, DORA are the DevOps metrics, right? The 4 key golden signals, the 4 key golden metrics. And for you, probably it's the Digital Operations Resiliency Act. And I remember a conversation I had last year at a conference, and I was sitting down at the lunch table, and I started I heard somebody talking about DORA, and then I chimed in, and then we were talking about 10 minutes about DORA, and everybody was an expert in DORA. And then we realized in the end, after 10 minutes, we were talking about 2 completely different things, right? And it's
That's insane, Andy, because I've been hearing DORA coming up, and I keep on thinking about the metrics, but I've been hearing it come up in like the security or this other aspect, and I'm like, how is this like I didn't realize they were 2 different things. I just learned that. I just learned that right now. That makes total sense, because I'm like, this makes no sense that there's these conversations like this around DORA. Like, what the hell's going on? Oh my goodness. All right.
And that's why, to your example, Kat, right? A service and a service can be 2 completely different things. Yeah, we are providing a service to our customers. This could be a consulting service. This could be whatever. And for an engineer, as you said, it could be a microservice that runs somewhere. Yeah.
And to our younger listeners, DORA is the Explorer. You know.
Awesome. You already made a segue a little bit into the next topic I want to ask you, and this is like how we are doing things within our organization. And obviously, in our organization, we are in the observability space. That means we do collect a lot of data from our customers that consume our service of observability and security and real user monitoring, everything. I know a lot of our listeners, right? They are somehow I guess most of you that are listening in are very familiar with what we do with observability, with performance engineering, with platform engineering, DevOps. These are typically the topics we talk about. So I would be interested in what are privacy considerations in observability. So I would just be interested in hearing what are the thoughts, what are the things that we as an observability vendor need to take care of? What are the pressing topics that you and your team are bringing to the Dynatrace engineering team?
That's a great question. I say our work is split in two aspects. There's the customer-facing side where we're building product features, and then the enablement within the software development lifecycle. So consulting on new designs and threat modeling them, giving tips on how can you protect privacy better at the design stage, the way through sort of code level checks and testing before it's released. I think for this discussion, the most interesting part to focus on is the customer-facing features. Mm-hmm. So which privacy considerations do our customers have that we then need to offer features for? And the key word here is sensitive data. we talked about the different types of personal data. But when it comes to B2B SaaS, and particularly a product like Dynatrace, where you have customers ingesting hundreds of terabytes per day of data in some cases, it's no longer enough to just focus on a few different identifiers, because you could have some data that's incredibly sensitive either to an individual person that's being monitored by the customer through their use of Dynatrace, or incredibly sensitive to the company. These are corporate secrets that they do not want to share. And this is something that I'm sure has come up on the podcast before, this question of how do you get customers to trust you as a SaaS provider? How can they have some proof that you can be trusted with their data? Because it feels like they're just sending this data into the void, and who knows what you're doing with it. So I would say our privacy features there complement all of our other security and compliance features that are part of this larger program of proving to customers that we can be trusted. And some of the features we have, for example, you can look at different stages of the data lifecycle when observability data is being ingested. So one phase you could look at is the very start, where data is being collected. You might want to mask it at collection. So if this is very sensitive data, the customer might still not trust us with it. They don't want it to ever go to a Dynatrace server. In fact, they might have a legal requirement that they don't send that data outside of the country or to a third party. So it needs to be masked there before it ever reaches us. Then there are further layers of masking. For example, as the data is being processed through Open Pipeline, they can apply various transformations, they can anonymize it, they can drop certain records that shouldn't have been collected. And then there's also masking at display. So it might be that you genuinely have a good reason to collect this data, but only a small number of people at your company should be able to see it. Or there's one column of the data that is particularly sensitive. And so you make sure that only a small group of people can see that. It's masking at display. And finally, we have some emerging features where we're looking at how to respect data subject rights and detect mistakenly ingested sensitive data. So if somehow sensitive data has made it past all these checks, you have a misconfigured regex, say, that you're using for masking, and you realize, oh no, we've collected these bank account numbers that we shouldn't have collected. You need ways to delete the data. But most of all, you need to know that it's there in the first place. So that's something that we're working on at the moment. Scanning for sensitive data can be really challenging at scale. Hard deletion, of course, is already a feature that's available. And the individual privacy rights requests, these are less common, but we're starting to see more awareness of it. When one of our customers makes a request to them and says, hey, please delete all of my personal data, they need to delete that from all of their systems and all of their third-party systems, and Dynatrace is one of them. And I think there's still limited understanding that observability systems can collect so much personal data. It really depends on your use case, but there may be a lot of personal data in there if you have legitimate reason to collect that about your monitored users. And so we also have an app to support that, to help with export and deletion requests to find data about a specific person.
Cool. So just that I understand this use case, because for me that's interesting. Let's assume one of our customers is in healthcare, and they're using Dynatrace to monitor their healthcare system. And then if one of their customers says, hey, I want you to remove all of my personal data from your records, for whatever reason, they have the legal right to do so. That obviously means that this healthcare provider needs to make sure that really all of the data related to that individual is really either removed or masked or however treated with. And that means some of the data may no longer be in their possession because it has been sent to a SaaS solution like our solution. So that's interesting. I never there. Wow. And then I know this is an episode that we wanted to record at some point. The the privacy app? What's it called again? The app that we have in Dynatrace to then fulfill these requests?
It's called Privacy Rights.
Privacy Rights app. Yeah, exactly. So
that's why you couldn't find it, Andy, because you were typing privacy instead of privacy.
You have to type with a British accent, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's for those of you that are listening in and that are actually using our product, be reminded that we have also a privacy app that you will find in either way how you write it, UK or US pronunciation. Cool. Really, really insightful for me. And I think this is why I mentioned in the beginning before we hit the record button today, Brian and I are always so lucky to have guests like you, because you bring such a wealth of knowledge on a topic, on an area that we are typically not exposed to, right? So, and this is why it's fascinating to learn all these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's every time we uncover one of these new topics, my mind just starts exploding with the complexity. It's not like this topic was thoroughly explored back in the early days of more simple architecture, more simple compute systems and all in a simpler world. It's when these are focused on, when everything is as complex as this, and you start thinking of, oh, well, we'd have to check this, we'd have to be able to do this. Like, it just blows my mind that people can even start at this level, right? And start getting a handle on it. But I guess it's really just starting and chipping away and finding bit by bit where we tackle I'll go with privacy, where we tackle the privacy aspects of this. And, you can't boil the ocean and get it all done at once, but just keeping a steady pace and moving forward and moving forward and moving forward as quick as you can, because these things obviously have consequences for a company. So you can't also just be slow about it. But it's just mind-boggling. Andy, you and I going back to our old, load testing stuff, right? When at first you would just do, okay, let's do a certain amount of people hitting the site, right? But then you start trying to recreate tests more accurately. And then the more accurately you try to recreate the tests, the more you uncover the complexity of the accuracy. And it keeps getting like, it's a rabbit hole, basically, is where I'm going. So to that point, with this being our first introduction, or at least my first introduction to all this privacy stuff, it's quite amazing. And not literally having my jaw on the floor, but figuratively, I've got my jaw on the floor for most of this episode thinking about all this. So very much thank you on that, Cat.
So on the topic of, and this is true obviously for every SaaS vendor, but let's stay with the observability space. In the end, it's about really building trust, right? We obviously need to make sure that our consumers, our customers, or any customers of SaaS services really trust that SaaS service, that privacy information that shouldn't be captured is not captured, and that if it is captured, only the people that are allowed to see it can see it. Is there anything else from an observability, like privacy considerations in observability that you wanted to highlight? Any other things that you think this is something that maybe people don't think about when it comes to privacy considerations in observability, or have you pretty much covered the key topics?
Yeah, maybe I could give a few examples just to make this more concrete.
Yeah.
So I covered all the features of how you'd try to stop sensitive data being seen by people who shouldn't have access to it. But why is there sensitive data in the first place? What kinds of sensitive data are we collecting in observability? If we just stick to the classics of logs, metrics, and traces, I know that observability tooling is offering many more features now, but if we just stick to the classics, logs, of course, it's really common to see people logging personal data for debugging purposes. Something like user X with email address Y logged in just now. I've heard lots of engineers referring to those as audit logs. And then you dig deeper and you ask, hey, do we need this audit log? Is there actually a requirement to have an audit log? If it is an audit log, could you please put it in a special audit log place, not just into the general logs that anyone can see? So those kind of things are really, really common. You see that all over the place. Then there's less obvious things like API design, for example. You can have an API design that isn't privacy preserving. So you might include personal data in the URL or in the request headers or something else that gets captured in the trace. And of course, depending on your settings, you could choose to mask that. You could choose not to capture it, but you might want to capture it for most cases. But you have this one API endpoint that is leaking loads of personal data or sensitive financial data, bank account numbers, for example, credit card numbers, IBANs. Those are also really common. And the real gotcha is even if you don't use observability tooling, somebody else further along the request chain might be using it. So that's something to keep in mind. Even if you think Doesn't matter how I design my APIs because I'm not using observability tooling. Somebody else might be, say your content delivery network.
Yeah, I'm just making notes because for me, this just opened up my eyes on API. First of all, both examples, the audit logs and the API design, were really interesting because the first one really on the logs is, if you log it, do you really need this data? And if you need it, what is the right storage? What is the right place to store it, right? Because obviously I guess every logging observability solution has a way to put data into certain buckets. We also call it buckets, and I'm not sure what other tools are calling it, but we can decide where the data gets stored, and then that bucket has then privileges on who is allowed to access the data. And we even do it on a record level. But I think that's an interesting question. So, A, do you really need this information in the log? And the way you log it out, it will end up, let's say, in a general store, but it shouldn't be there. So you need to think about this. The API design is also pretty interesting because if you put sensitive data on a URL, it actually means that from the browser of the mobile app until that URL reaches your backend, there might be many different hops in between. There might be caching layers. There might be other web servers, reverse proxies, and most of them are logging the URLs for various reasons, right? I mean, typically the URLs always get logged. And then the question is, if there's sensitive information on there, then, and there's a third party in the middle, this is obviously not what you want. And then also on your backend system, you want to vet it. You want to make sure that certain data doesn't get logged by default, but only if you really need it. And then again, think about where this data gets stored. Is this something in your work that you also, are you part of API design reviews? Are you part of code reviews to validate this? Is this something we can kind of automate, or are there any best practices on how we can make sure that already in the design phase you are considering all of these privacy rules?
That's a great question. And the classic challenge is, how do you scale that? So we would like to be there for every code change, for every new API that's introduced, but how do you scale that with a relatively small team? And I would say AI is opening up lots of new opportunities now. I was at Pepper, a privacy engineering conference hosted by the Usenix Association in the US just a few weeks ago. And AI and how we could build in LLMs was on everyone's lips. They were saying, I've been trying it to automate privacy code reviews and threat modeling. So everyone is trying it out. It's still not at a mature enough phase yet, but it gives me hope for the future that we could really scale this out en masse so that every pull request is checked, for example. Until that point, there is a much simpler analog method, which is privacy coding guidelines, and also you can work this into your API guidelines. So then you can make it clear to each developer, hey, it's your responsibility to follow these practices, and try and keep those as simple as possible. No legal wording. Ideally, don't even mention privacy. Just document a requirement. You must not put user identifiers, email addresses, and list every single data type, because that is a really common source of confusion. If you say PII or personal data, most people don't know what that means, or if they think they know what it means, they don't know all the different categories it can cover.
It almost seems like, as there's security scanning tools, that it would be really beneficial for there to be, some privacy scanning tools. One example I think of a lot is, as we're talking with customers who are sending us logs, they're looking for BAAs and all this other kind of stuff about making sure that we don't store certain things. And my thought is always, why don't you just not put that in the log, right? Obviously there might be some times, but they're like, no, there's no reason for us to do it. We just have no idea what's in the logs, right? And that is the big challenge, because they have this legacy of code writing to logs and they have no idea what's in it. So even starting with some sort of maybe LLM-based, log scanning tool, which can go through and identify, identifiable data, let developers know, start going back and fixing it. Also, maybe even doing the code reviews. Just like with security, there's all these tools that'll go in and do these scans. It's again, opening this whole world of possibilities and endless things that are needed. So, yeah, I can imagine at some point in the future, people not only asking us for our security status codes, and all the different benchmarks we pass. There'll be ones for privacy, which obviously there are already some of those, but even more of those kind of things going on. It's just mind-boggling. Well, it's such a deep topic suddenly within 50 minutes.
If I can add one simple example.
Yeah.
If, as a listener, you're thinking, oh, I wish we had privacy code scanning, but we can't afford to integrate LLMs into our workflows. I know it's expensive. We don't really trust them yet. A very simple option, which you just reminded me of, Brian, when you mentioned, can we leverage security tooling? Something we tried was using SemGrep, which we're already using for security code scanning, to do some very, very basic regex checks to look for variable names that look like they might have personal data. So look for var email address, var email, var user profile ID, things like that. Tailor them to your context. And it turns out that the variables don't vary that much. So although there are some solutions out there that are more complex and try and do data flow modeling and figure out sources and sinks, they're very heavyweight. They take a long time to run. SemGrep is super quick. You might already have it in your workflows. And you can actually get surprisingly far with just a quick regex scan. And suddenly okay, in this system we knew nothing about, based on the code base, it's processing email addresses, phone numbers, first names. Now we have some information, we can go and talk to the team about why those are being processed.
And for reference, this is SemGrep, SEMGRAP. Perfect. We'll add the link to the description of the podcast. Because it also reminded me of one thing that I've started to advocate for this, but I think now with this privacy discussion, I have some additional use cases. When you think about the software delivery lifecycle and you're deploying a new change in your test environment and you run some tests, I've been advocating for analyzing your logs, your metrics, your traces on certain patterns. So one example would be, do we have debug logs in a higher level environment? Or as people are moving from logs to traces, is the same exception now available on a log and a trace? Because then it's duplicated data that nobody really needs. We could also look, and there's a new company that just launched, Oli Garden. They're defining some best practices on what is good observability, what is good tracing. So for instance, do you have over-instrumentation, right? As we're asking engineers to instrument their code, are the instrumenting functions that are getting called at 1,000 times per transaction? Brian, this goes back to our early days with Dynatrace, when we had the shotgun instrumentation, and then sometimes we had pure paths that were kind of, timing out, or like having like 10,000 nodes because somebody instrumented the wrong method that was called 50,000 times. And so the same could be done now as part of your software delivery lifecycle. You can then analyze your logs, your metrics, your traces based on patterns, and then act as a quality gate. In Dynatrace, you can use the Site Reliability Guardian for that to execute certain queries against that observability data and then say, hey, it seems you have some personal PII data in your logs, or you've instrumented this new method and you're capturing data that you shouldn't capture. And so kind of like a quality gating. That's cool. Wow. Cat, unfortunately, as I told you, sometimes time flies when we have this discussion, and it's unbelievable that it's almost the top of the hour. Is there anything else? Obviously, besides, we will have you back and go into more details. But any final thought for today's episode that you said, I would have wished I would have said this, but there was no time. Any final thoughts from your side for our listeners?
I would have two final thoughts. One is, I fear I've made this sound very complicated. It can be complicated, but I don't want it to seem so complicated that it intimidates people and think, well, we can't be privacy preserving, it's too hard. I would say always go back to that example I gave of, does this meet expectations, our users' expectations, my own expectations? That is the simplest way of thinking about it, and it's quite effective. The second thought is, if you're finding that approach falls down because you're trying to design for users who have very different experiences from your own, and you can't put yourself in their shoes very easily, persona-based threat modeling is something I've been exploring, and I'd recommend you check it out. So leveraging the UX personas you probably already have for your users. You know who your target audience is. You're thinking about them as you design the user interfaces and the whole overall user experience. Use those as a reference when you're trying to evaluate this. Does this meet my expectations or not? That can help you put yourself in the shoes of somebody from a minority group, say somebody who might be persecuted on the basis of this data being shared, which you would be totally fine with sharing publicly, having on the front page of the newspaper, because it's not a problem for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very excited to hear you want to have me back, because we can dig into that much further in the next episode.
And I took notes. I took notes to say next episode we have a lot of topics to discuss. Yeah, very cool. Brian, do you want to close
Yes, I want to close it. Have
because I know
Java.
you have to get these tickets.
I got a minute and 54 seconds. But then I go into a queue. You know how that all works.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. And I didn't mean to make it sound complicated as well with my reactions to it. To me, it's more the complication of once you start thinking of the possibilities and the layers and layers of all this, you realize there's so much to it, right? I mean, it exists in so many places. And as an organization, you are exposed to a lot of risk, and making sure you have it all locked up. It's not just like, oh yeah, we'll just put a firewall up and we're good, right? It's very, very big picture, right? Now, there are simple tools and there's a simple process as you're explaining that you go through this stuff and you do it very methodologically. What the hell's the word I'm saying there? Is that right? I don't even know. I'm not even going to bother trying. But it's a fascinating topic. And, if I were not the old man I was, I would be, years ago, I might have tried to switch into security, and then I might be thinking, oh, this is a whole new field here with the privacy, because this is like the new frontier of excitement, Andy and I were part of the frontier of performance, if you will, right, where we were trying to convince people it's something important, right? We used to have to battle people, not physically battle them, but, really try to convince people, like, performance is an important thing. Now it's standard everywhere. Obviously, security has real consequences, and people are taking it seriously. And at a certain point, with an unknown number of people in the organization, it's time to start doing the security, the privacy setup. So it's exciting stuff. And I think there's just like so many worlds of possibilities. And when you think about the idea that, AI is going to be writing people's code soon, there definitely are other areas people need to think about, start branching out to, so they can continue to work in this amazing field. But so go work in privacy.
Absolutely. World of possibilities.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you both for a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the insights. Yeah. See you soon on the next podcast.
Yes. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Thank
Bye.
you.